April 15th, 2021, WWE released 10 different performers of differing stature and usage, just scant days following WrestleMania 37. Those who were shocked by the ousting of the Iconics, Tucker, Samoa Joe, and others at least understood one thing. This wasn't quite as extreme as the bloodletting of 1 year prior to that very day. Black Wednesday became the catch-all phrase for WWE's mass releases and furloughs on April 15, 2020, as several dozen individuals from all walks of the company were outright released, or at least laid off for the time being. Ostensibly done as a means of tightening up payroll amid the pandemic, there was more than a little irritation for many folks once it was realized that WWE was due to turn record profits whether they let anybody go or not. But such is life in publicly traded WWE. In this video, we're going to examine the fates of many of the wrestlers who were released in and around that fateful day. For the most part, backstage producers who were furloughed and aging veteran staffers who were let go are omitted from this feature. Instead, we focus on those who have some kind of inclination as an active wrestler, or at least the potential towards, going forward. We will look at the staggering list of names who felt the cut of the axe and see 1 year later where they've all ended up. Mason Ryan, Stevie Ray, Earthquake, Alundra Blaze, Norman Smiley, Zach Gowen, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ahmed Johnson, Tory Wilson, Buff, Bagwell, Robert Gibson, Dave Taylor, Terry Taylor, and Godfather's Holmes. Dwayne Gill, Adam Bomb, Michael Hayes, Cor Von, S.A. Rios, Jim Manai, the manager from CAIN, Jim Powers, Francine, Jack Swagger, Mean Gene, Fat Chick Thriller, Duke the Dumpster, Oklahoma Manta. What happened to that wrestler? Some were main eventing, which leaves me lamenting. What happened to that wrestler? Some since long forgotten, but their memories live on. The Revival. Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder were actually released 5 days before the mass canning, but we figured we would throw them in here anyhow, just to show how much considerable talent was let go in that calendar month. Dash and Dawson had won tag team gold on each WWE brand, but stalled pushes and an apparent company disinterest in emphasizing tag wrestling led to the two asking for their releases as far back as January 2019. They finally got their wishes on April 10th of 2020, and they were unconditional releases at that. Since then, Dax Harwood and Cash Wheeler have become major players in All Elite Wrestling as FTR reigned as tag champions and currently fill the Arn and Tully roles in the Pinnacle. Drake Maverick. This one came as a bit of a surprise, as Maverick's release came just 3 days after he was announced as a participant in the interim Cruiserweight title tournament. He then posted a melancholy video to social media, tearfully lamenting his situation. Maverick was permitted to stick around for the duration of his time in the title tournaments, which went all the way up to a loss in the final match to Santos Escobar. Through his performances and heightened fan sentiment, Maverick was legitimately rehired by WWE. And yes, Maverick is still part of WWE today, forming a somewhat unorthodox duo with Killian Dane on the NXT brand. Ty Conti. A trained judoka, Conti had no wrestling experience when she was signed to a contract in late 2016, at which time she began training at WWE's Performance Center. High-profile matches for Conti included participation in the 2017 and 2018 Mae Young Classics, and a highlighted spot in the WrestleMania 34 Women's Battle Royal. In early 2020, Conti reportedly walked out of NXT for a spell before returning after 5 weeks away. She was released from WWE in April 2020 and following her 90 days of inactivity turned up in AEW. Conti has since become a featured player in the company's women's division, while many have noted her vast improvement since switching promotions. Eric Young. A versatile veteran that can play anything from a silly comedy character to a cold-hearted psychopath, Young demonstrated his worth as leader of the well-liked Sanity stable in NXT. On the main roster, however, Young found himself lost in the shuffle. By his final year in the company, Young could barely keep his head above the currents and was scarcely seen outside of the predictable 24/7 title chase sequences. After Young's release, there seemed to be a logical destination for him, a return to Impact Wrestling, and sure enough, he popped up there once more at the 2020 Slammiversary pay-per-view. Since then, Young has reigned once more as Impact World Champion, but is presently shelved with a torn ACL. Cassius Ohno. A world-travelled veteran with a wealth of knowledge and insight, OHNO migrated from NXT to its UK equivalent brand in early 2019 as both a wrestler and producer. Over his final year with the company, OHNO split his time crisscrossing the Atlantic, wrestling for both brands. His final WWE match took place on March 7th, 2020, a battle royal to determine a #1 contender for the NXT UK Championship. Since his release, the man better known as Chris Hero hasn't wrestled, but is currently co-host of the Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling podcast with eternally busy podcast impresario Conrad Thompson. Sarah Logan. From 2017 to 2019, Logan had been 1/3 of the irreverent Riot Squad, and often had her Viking heritage referenced in both costume and by company announcers. Logan never captured any gold in WWE, but her time in the Riot Squad provided copious airtime. The group dissolved in 2019, after which time Logan became a singles performer on Raw with little success. In one of her final WWE matches, Logan lost to then NXT Women's Champion Rhea Ripley on Raw. 2 months following her release, Logan announced that she would be stepping away from wrestling for the foreseeable future. She has since welcomed a son named Raymond with her husband, ERICK, of the Viking Raiders. The Colognes. The Colognes, the Shining Stars, simply Primo or Epico, whatever you want to call them, the cousins enjoyed long tenures with WWE, with Primo's tenure alone amounting to over 12 years. Neither man wrestled in WWE in the year preceding their releases, instead working for Puerto Rico's World Wrestling Council, which is part owned by Primo's dad and Epico's uncle, Carlos Colon. WWC hasn't run since the onset of the pandemic, but the Colognes remain active wrestlers, appearing for independent promotions in Florida and Texas, with Primo and Eddie Colon as Epico and Orlando Colon, together known as the Colon Dynasty. Alexander Jaksic. A developmental project that never wrestled a TV bout for even NXT, Jaksic worked his first match at an NXT live event in October of 2019. Jaksic had only begun wrestling in 2017, and before long, he was splitting his time between American indie promotions and various companies in Germany. In all, Jaksic wrestled 10 matches for the company between October 2019 and March 2020 before getting his release. In August of 2021, under his real name of Zorro Vesta, the former Jaksic turned up in Germany's Championship of Wrestling promotion, where he worked 4 matches in a 2-day stretch. MJ Jenkins. A pro since 2015, Jenkins put together an impressive resume of work in various American indies, as well as a few 2017 bouts in Impact Wrestling. Jenkins joined with WWE in 2018, competing in that year's Mae Young Classic, and then spent the next 2.5 years with NXT. However, only one of her bouts, a Battle Royal, was ever televised, and she worked house shows otherwise. Best research indicates that since her release, Jenkins has only wrestled once, teaming with Kenzie Page in a loss to Brandy Rhodes and Ali at AEW's 2020 Fight for the Fallen. Nick OGARELLI. A trainee of the same New Jersey-based monster factory that churned out Damian Priest, Matt Riddle, Bam Bam Bigelow, Raven, The Big Show, among many others, OGARELLI has star potential on his looks alone, between the wild man mane of hair and the chiseled physique. He signed with WWE in early 2019 and spent the next year wrestling in untelevised matches for NXT. After a 6-month lull following his release, OGARELLI turned up in AEW, where he began wrestling under his real name Nick Camarado. Today, Nick is part of the factory, a henchman to real-life trainer and mentor QT Marshall. Heath Slater. Of the original 8 Nexus members, Slater was the only one that hadn't left the company or been relegated to a non-wrestling role for a time until April 2020. In his decade with the organization, Slater carved out a sizable niche for himself as the go-to comic relief, getting bounced around by fan favorites while fighting like hell to support his untold litany of kids. It didn't take long for Slater to find work when his no-compete expired, as the one-man band turned up in Impact going simply by Heath. A reunion with Rhino followed, but Slater has been inactive since the autumn due to a pair of hernias and a torn abductor muscle. AIDEN English. From vaudevillain to tributary crooner to 205 Live announcer, the Drama King carved out quite the unique WWE resume for himself. The dissolution of the Rusev Day contingent pretty much spelled the end of English's time wrestling in the company, as his last 15 months there were almost exclusively spent as a broadcaster, save for a lone match with CAIN's OHNO the weekend of WrestleMania 35. After his release, English worked 2 bookings for Zalo Pro Wrestling in the autumn of 2020, and is the owner of the YouTube channel Wrestling with Whiskey, offering insight and opinions on many whiskey brands and types. Rachel Evers. The daughter of legendary manager Paul Ellering signed on with WWE earlier in 2019 after more than 3 years of extensively working the indie scene. Unlike with her prior appearances in the Mae Young Classics of 2017 and 2018, Rachel's time in NXT didn't result in televised bouts. Misfortune struck when Evers tore her ACL in July of 2019, sidelining her for close to a year. She was released late in her time away and went on to work 2 matches for All Elite Wrestling before appearing for Impact Wrestling on their Rebellion 2021 pay-per-view. CURT Hawkins. A long losing streak for the New York native ended with a feel-good moment on the WrestleMania 35 pre-show when he and Zack Ryder became Raw Tag Team Champs. The thrill was short-lived, however, as the duo dropped the gold 2 months later, and Hawkins resumed life as a veritable main roster afterthought. Hawkins, once more under real name Brian Myers, signed on with Impact Wrestling almost immediately after his no-compete evaporated, and lost to reigning world champion Eddie Edwards in a title bout. Myers still competes for Impact today, now wearing an eye patch after an apparent near blinding at the hands of Edwards. Zack Ryder. The poster child for the increased atheism towards brass rings in professional wrestling, for every one shining moment in Ryder's WWE tenure, there have been 10 kicks in the balls, whether literal or figurative. The criminally low ceiling above Ryder's head caused fans to take notice, but the release on Black Wednesday gave Matt Cardona a chance to do something new with his career. When his no-compete expired, Cardona briefly turned up in AEW, but only for a handful of appearances. He's since caught on with Impact Wrestling, where he's feuded with longtime friend Myers, with whom he also co-hosts the Major Wrestling Figure podcast. No Way Jose. The novelty of the conga lines and costumes revelers wore thin long ago, but Jose persisted into 2020 as an underneath talent on the Raw brand, with that song still stuck in our heads, by the way. His last match with WWE came just 2 days before the cuts began, losing to Bobby Lashley in under 2 minutes on Monday Night Raw. Since his release, Jose has only wrestled once, working in Indy in Georgia under the name Levi Valens. Outside the ring, the former Jose revealed in early March that he's going to be a father. TINO Sabbatelli. The former Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive back had been with WWE for over 5.5 years without breaking through to the main roster. Sabbatelli spent much of his time in NXT as partner to future 24/7 champion Riddick Moss, and Tino's last televised win came in early 2018. Following his release, Sabbatelli wrestled 1 time for AEW, losing in tag team action on an episode of Dark to Best Friends. Since then, stories emerged that Sabbatelli had been acting as a spy within AEW, an idea that gains a bit of credence when one learns that he re-signed with WWE in October of 2020. Cesar Bononi. The former American-style football standout from Brazil scarcely made TV appearances during his 4 years spent wrestling in NXT. His last match for the brand came 6 weeks prior to his release, when he teamed with Sabbatelli in a victory at a live event. Bononi has since turned up in AEW and has been regularly aligned with the likes of Peter Avalon and Ryan Nemeth. In recent times, Bononi has made public the struggles in securing proper leukemia treatment for his wife Camilla, who as of this writing was going through chemo and is due to receive bone marrow from her sister. Our best wishes go out to the entire Bononi family. SERENA DEEB. This list was meant to be exclusive to those who were active wrestlers in WWE, but there's an obvious reason why DEEB qualifies. The former Straight Edge Society associate was signed to WWE as a performance center coach in early 2018, after being only semi-active as a wrestler for the previous few years. Following her release 2 years later, DEEB took to the ring once more, putting on an unexpected gem with Thunder Rosa on AEW Dynamite. DEEB's quality performances got her signed to AEW, and she also reigns as NWA Women's Champion, though at press time, DEEB has been sidelined with a knee injury. ERICK Rowan. At the time Big Red was released, longtime partner Brodie Lee was just getting started as the leader of the Dark Order. Many predicted a reunion between the Bludgeon Brothers within the mysterious cult, but it sadly never came to pass. Rowan's first high-profile appearance post-release came after the death of John Huber in December, when he made an emotionally charged run-in during Brodie Lee's memorial show to fend off an interfering Wardlow and to pay tribute to his fallen brother. Now wrestling as Eric Redbeard, the former Rowan has wrestled 3 matches post-WWE, including bouts with Homicide and with Fred Rosser, the former Darren Young. EC3. Did anybody bother to tell Vince that Ethan Carter III is not an actual blood relative of Dixie, thus petty burial wasn't necessary? Once EC3 failed to stand out over outgoing crowd favourite Dean Ambrose in early 2019, it was all downhill from there. His last WWE match had come in September of 2019, and long before then, his galling directionlessness had become a meme unto itself. Since his release, EC3 emerged once more in the home of his greatest glories, Impact Wrestling, and feuded with Moose for several months. He's since caught on with Ring of Honor, with whom he signed a contract in February of 2021. Dan Matha. The 6'7" heavyweight boasts a rather unique appearance, but met the same fate as many of those already named in this list. He never did make it to the full-time main roster, despite being in the system for some time. Making matters worse, Matha's release reportedly came after he was involved in a horrendous car accident, which resulted in Matha being ejected from the vehicle. Matha has not wrestled since his release, and it's currently unknown whether he will return to the ring. For now, he hosts the Spark in the Dark podcast with a guest list that includes Riddick Moss, Caesar Bononi, and Finn Balor. Curtis Axel. Axel wasn't released until 2 weeks following Black Wednesday, but given his 12.5-year tenure with the organization, his name bears inclusion in this video. The third-generation grappler held Intercontinental and Tag Team Gold under the WWE banner, but was mostly used as comic relief, bumbling around with the Social Outcasts and the B-Team. Since being let go from WWE, Joe Hennig has yet to return to the ring, despite fellow Outcast Heath Slater claiming that he tried to get Hennig a gig in Impact. According to Slater, Hennig is simply enjoying life for now before making his next move. Mike and Maria Kanellis. With their release comes the loss of a truly excellent theme song, the greatest power ballad since the prime of Cutting Crew. The Kanellis' tenure with WWE was a rather interesting one, and included rumours of unhappiness, wanting a release, getting their contracts extended, then seeking a release once more anyway, as well as Mike attending rehab, and the pair having 2 children during their 3-year WWE run. Since then, both Mike and Maria have re-emerged in Ring of Honor, where Mike reunited with Kingdom partner Matt Taven, and Maria helped usher in the December launch of company fan initiative, The Experience. Cain Velasquez. The 2-time UFC heavyweight champion and future UFC Hall of Famer was treated as a major deal upon his arrival in WWE in 2019, in large part because he was matched up against Brock Lesnar, who he had pounded senseless in the octagon 9 years prior. While Velasquez had shown solid promise in the rings of AAA earlier that year, his match with Lesnar at Crown Jewel was an abbreviated flop due to Cain working with an ailing knee. Since his release, Velasquez has largely been out of the spotlight, aside from some charitable endeavours that he's tweeted about. Though Cain is retired from MMA, given the sport's penchant for creating super fights involving icons, perhaps one more trip to the cage could be in the offing. Lio Rush. The former Cruiserweight champion and ex-hype man to Bobby Lashley appeared to tease retirement following his release in 2020. With him releasing his first studio album, not to mention vocalizing his disdain for WWE's political climate, Rush seemed to have little inclination of stepping back inside the ring. That changed last July when Rush returned to the independent scene, wrestling longtime peer Joey Janela at a Game Changer wrestling event. Since then, Rush has begun leaving his mark everywhere, winning the MLW middleweight title in January, capturing the AAA Cruiserweight title the following month, and competing in New Japan's Super J Cup and Cup USA. Rush was also a contestant on the 36th season of MTV's The Challenge. Deonna Purrazzo. According to The Virtuosa, WWE Creative believed that she wasn't ready for television, which is a statement many would take issue with. Her signing with WWE in 2018 necessitated pulling out of All In, but post-WWE life has seen Purrazzo pick up where she'd left off as a star on the rise. Since Purrazzo didn't have to adhere to the 90-day clause per her specific release terms, she turned up in Impact Wrestling a month after her release. In her third match back with the organization, Purrazzo won the Impact Knockouts title from Jordynne Grace. Now in her second reign, which began in November, Purrazzo recently retired veteran WWE and ECW star Jazz at Impact's Hardcore Justice. The Good Brothers. Among the more surprising cuts of the bunch were the releases of Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson, just days after they'd made significant appearances in the Boneyard match at WrestleMania 36. Post-release, the two were very vocal in their distaste for then Raw showrunner Paul Heyman over Heyman's purported dishonesty towards them. In addition to producing a pair of so bad they're practically artful pay-per-views through their Talk and Shopomania series, Gallows and Anderson also found high-profile gigs once more. Not only did the two win Impact's tag titles later in 2020, but they reunited with Kenny Omega and later the Young Bucks for a Bullet Club revival of sorts in AEW. Kurt Angle. Though he'd been retired from the ring and was working as a producer, Angle was one of the few producers that was outright released instead of being sent home on furlough. Fans wanting one more match from the Olympic hero kinda got one when he returned to WWE for a night 6 weeks later to officiate a match between Matt Riddle and Timothy Thatcher. Now 52, it's perhaps not likely that Angle would ever wrestle again, but he remains close to the business, co-hosting the Kurt Angle Show with Conrad Thompson. Angle has also gotten involved in nutrition through his new business, Physically Fit, which offers protein bites designed to cut down on cravings. Rusev. Next to Zack Ryder and perhaps the Revival, Rusev stands out in this group as someone whose WWE body of work ultimately paled to what fans and critics believed it should have been, based on value and potential. At one time in WWE, Rusev was an absolute beast, entering WrestleMania in a friggin' tank, but by the end, he'd lost wife Lana to Bobby Lashley and was routinely beaten by the Almighty. Once free from WWE, however, Rusev gave way to Miro, a video game-playing, unconventionally dressing, more outspoken villain in AEW, where he debuted as Kip Sabian and Penelope Ford's choice of best man. Miro is also a prolific gamer, with hundreds of thousands of combined subscribers across both YouTube and Twitch.